Maybe it's my father's influence, but I was always taught to find gratitude in everything. And though I hated my dad, a topic for another day, and wanted to ignore or question everything he ever told me, did have a good sense that I was lucky to have gotten as far as I have. Um, which honestly, where I ended up, where I'm at now, like really shouldn't have happened. My parents were immigrants, low income. Lots of fighting in the home, usually over money, but often over other things as well. And my parents weren't really educated. My dad technically went to theology school in Korea, but I question the rigor of the program based off of everything I've heard. My mom went to a junior college in Korea for nursing, but it's different than, community college here now for nursing because she wasn't learning anything like that you would associate with nursing today. She was just learning how to change bedpans and give sponge baths and nothing really more. Um, so getting into UCLA, a competitive school, was not something you would have bet on, let alone eventually getting up to a PhD in philosophy, which is by many metrics one of the more competitive graduate programs, especially in the humanities. Um, then getting an actual tenure track job, like that's nearly impossible. Like chances of all this happening, given my background, I'd probably give it less than 1%. And that's probably being generous. My parents always attributed all this to God's divine intervention. But me, I was aware of how many times my life trajectory could have gone in a very different direction. Like, I'm still remember, like in 10th grade, I could have gotten more than a suspension for possession of stolen goods. There was at least several times I could have been caught for shoplifting and had a criminal record and gone to juvenile hall. Um, I know that they wouldn't have let me off all that easy given the value of the things I was stealing. So, I've been reckless when driving. There were several times where I probably could have died in a car accident because I like to try to push, especially in high school, I like to push the car to the limits. Um, in high school, my geometry and Spanish teacher were extremely supportive and helped me to get leadership positions. In college, I acted the fool, and I remember once the resident assistants had to pull me over and had a talking to me, and instead of filing a bunch of paperwork, and then it becoming a whole thing because I was saying and doing pretty outlandish things to other students. It could have landed me in some real trouble. It could have gone on certain records that would have eliminated me from being selected for various programs. But instead, she just trusted that I was actually good inside or something, and then just had a talking to and thought that would address it. And I got selected for various programs at UCLA by supervisors who had no idea what they were getting themselves into. Both the student health advocate program and the orientation program. The orientation program was wild. Like I actually thought that first year I was there, I had done some really offensive stuff. Um, I had also once with a fellow counselor shut down the entire internet in the dorms during orientation because we tried to pull a fast one and hook up an extra router to give our students an edge so that we could hook up more computers and get them enrolled in their classes before the other students got to. Um, that supervisor for the orientation program who knew all this dumb shit that I did, she's the one who wrote a glowing recommendation on my behalf that got me a free ride to Boston University for a master's program there. And I can tell you this that it was her letter because they actually told me during the phone conversation when they said that I got this scholarship that it was her letter that really impressed them and made them go with me as the scholarship candidate. Um, my goodness. I mean, I honestly would not have gone to that university if I didn't get that financial support because it was way too expensive and I could not justify going there without that money. I honestly have no idea how I got into a PhD program. The acceptance rate on average, I think around that time was 2% for any of the programs worth applying to. And the advice I got was if you don't get into one of the top like 40, 50 PhD programs in the country, then just don't bother because you're just not going to get a job if you don't, get a PhD from one of these places. And so, it was very low acceptance rate. I actually applied to like Oh my goodness, I think it was like 30 places, hoping to get into just one. Um, and luckily, I did get into at least one. My dissertation advisor probably left me off the hook because I honestly did not think much of my own dissertation. I thought it was lacking, that it was insufficient. But I do wonder, like, ugh, maybe he went a little easy on me because by then I had already landed this teaching fellowship at Villanova. But that program required that I finish my PhD before I start um, in the fall, which means that like if I wonder if he felt a little pressure to just like make sure I got that degree so that I didn't lose this opportunity. Um, and at Villanova, they supported me in developing my teaching and research, like both monetarily, allowing me to like go on these to these conferences and to certain programs to help me develop my teaching a bit more. But they also had like an in-house instructor development program that I thought was amazing. Um, and later, I found out that there were individuals advocating for me during my application process at Pasadena City College, right? People who have really pushed for me so that I landed that job. I didn't know any of them. They just saw something in me that I don't think I necessarily deserved it. I'm sure there were other candidates that were just as worthy. Um, so, I'm pointing all this out for a reason. Like, I was lucky, right? Like, the chances of me getting to where I'm at now, like that, in my mind, it's like fairly low probability. And I know without a doubt that I got as far as I did because I just happened to have the right people open doors for me at the right time, every step of the way, right? And that I got, and also on top of that, I got away with a lot of stuff that I could have definitely been caught for, and changed my life trajectory in a very different way. There's no way that I move forward the way I did without them. And recognizing this truth meant both that I feel a deep sense of gratitude, but I also feel to some degree that I don't belong. You see, like every time I got to the quote unquote next level, right? So going from like, high school degree to a bachelor's degree to a master's to a doctorate, right? Every step of the way, I knew that I probably didn't have the same background as the people next to me. And it became more kind of explicit the higher up I went. All right. Because let's be honest, philosophy is something you pursue because you're passionate about it, not when you're looking for stable work, not when you're concerned with making ends meet. Right. I remember the advice I was given by my mentor when I was at UCLA was, he said, don't even bother applying to a PhD program. Like, try to find something else, right? The chances were low to getting accepted anyways, because you know, you'd have no job prospect unless you were accepted to one of the more competitive programs. And the competitive programs, like I said, was like 2% acceptance rate on average, right? You probably won't get good financial support even if you get accepted. So, getting accepted is one thing, but then getting accepted with some financial package that they could guarantee you, that was a question mark. Um, it's also so it's not worth pursuing unless you don't have to take out loans for 6 to 7 years. That's a long time for them to kind of financially support you. Even if you do get in with that financial support, right, there's also a 50% chance you probably won't even complete the program. So the 2% is just getting accepted, right? Like half of the students don't seem to even finish the program. A large chunk of the PhD students um, quit before then for various reasons. A large chunk of them, from what I was told, this was me as an undergrad, kind of not knowing, but my mentor was pretty honest about it because he wanted me to be clear-eyed in making this decision instead of doing it from a place of distorted reality or something. So a large chunk of the PhD students were probably suffering from severe depression or anxiety or both, right? Many of them probably resorting to heavy smoking and drinking. Um, and on top of that, you're going to be super stressed because you're probably not going to get a job in academia once you finish because there's just not that many positions out there, right? So if there's anything that I had an interest in other than philosophy, anything else in life that would keep me satisfied, happy, um, he told me pursue that instead. Just don't bother with philosophy. And it was honest and good advice. Like everything he said to me was from my experience and from everything I've seen is more or less on the dot. Like, I mean, some things might have changed over the years, but a lot of this is true, at least when it comes to the competitiveness and acceptance, but also that you need to get into one of these more competitive programs, and funding is not always guaranteed, and the job prospects are just horrible, right? These all still remain true. So I actually give the same advice to my students who are thinking about going to graduate school, right? Unless I see some particular reason that I should really push for them to go for it. There are a few cases where I've seen students where they have the clear potential. They're already a cut above everyone else and doing graduate work already to some degree, at least in terms of their writing and research. Um, like rarely do I tell a student like just go for it, right? Like I would give them the reality, and then let them know how daunting and hard it is. Um, because like just because I made it to where I'm at doesn't mean that another person is going to. Because again, I acknowledge the amount of luck that probably went into my getting to where I got. Um, I soon realized that you know like I said, I know the chances of my getting all the way, given my own personal background, was very unlikely that I got to where I was. And I think it became even more clear as I started the PhD program and I'm hanging around all these graduate schools. I mean, I had a sense of it during the master's program, but the master's program was kind of weird because it was in theology and some of them were coming from, it was a different kind of program. It wasn't as competitive. A lot of them were there for vocational reasons, right? These are people who are going into the ministry. There were like half of the students weren't. They were going into academia, but because there were so many students that were going there for vocational reasons, it was a very different kind of mix. But I think in the PhD program, it became very clear to me that I was not the norm, right? Um, I think most of the people who made it to up to the PhD program tended to be middle to upper class, come from a middle to upper class family, probably well educated. Um, And let's be honest, philosophy at the time that I was going overwhelmingly was dominated by white males. That's just how it was for a lot of different reasons. And I know that they've done a lot to try to address this issue and to root out any sort of biases that are contributing to it. But that's just how it was when I was in graduate school. I didn't know the exact reason, but I do know that academic philosophy has in the past um, you know, kind of protected a certain way about doing things that kind of, how do I put this? Like it's like it was kind of like an old boys club, right? So it's hard to see major changes happen. I think anytime soon, in part because new faculty comes up only when the old guard kind of retires or dies, and that's just not happening very quickly, right? And that was just the reality. I felt it at every place I've been to, right? Whether it was UCLA, Villanova, UC Santa Barbara. When I was at Boston University, I mean, Boston is like, right, old money crew. Like um, you just saw a lot of that same sort of demographic. It's not a criticism. I'm just letting you know that this is just what I experienced. I remember I remember my partner at the time telling me when we were dating that I sounded like an old white man. And I did sound like an old white man because that's what I was surrounded by. It made a lot of sense. I mean, I think it made more sense to her when she finally hung out with my professors and fellow grad students. Because she was trying to figure out like, why do you not speak like my friends and like just normal working folk, right? Like, why do you sound so weird and different? And she hung out with them. And it's like, oh my goodness, you sound like they all sound like very similar. Y'all talk in the same way, right? Y'all have the same mannerisms and the same sort of way of intellectualizing things. Very head heavy, right? And I was like, yeah, that's kind of how we all are. Um, and what's crazy is that it was kind of like a weird switch that happened, right? So like when she sees me hang out with friends like from college, like just fellow buddies, right? I didn't sound anything like that, right? It was like it was almost as though I switched my speech pattern when I was hanging out in that academic circle. At the time, I really never thought much of it. I'd been doing it for so long. But the reality was, I don't know what the word used nowadays would be, like code switching, right? I was in some sense pretending in speech and mannerisms, in the things I talked about. I was doing all the things that I needed to do to fit in. And it was a world that was honestly foreign to me. I mean, a decent number of the faculty at these colleges had like annual like tickets to the opera or symphony. I only got to go to the symphony when I was in Boston because they had some cheap pass for students where they could get in to these like leftover seats if there were any available. You just kind of had to like reserve them on the day of. Forget exactly what that program was called, but I got to. I mean, I love the symphony, but I couldn't afford it. Right, it's expensive. But the fact that they actually went out of their way to get tickets to go regularly, right? That's just not the crowd I'm used to like rolling with, right? Um, a few of the younger faculty might have listened to like punk rock or something, but I didn't know any faculty member that was steeped deep in hip hop culture. Um, Most of their references to art or culture were went completely over my head. At least at UCLA and UC Santa Barbara, I could connect with the faculty on some Cali shit. So like when I sat in a class, I remember before I kind of decided on what PhD program to go to. Um, I visited UC Santa Barbara, and I got to sit in a class with one of the professors, and that professor showed up to the class in t-shirt and board shorts and flip-flops, and I was like, yeah, Cali to the core, right? Like this guy, he must have surfed back in the days, right? Um, it was just that vibe. Villanova was a whole different story, right? The faculty there were all addressed by title, and everyone dressed up like to the T to teach. Like, I mean, they full on tie and suit and everything, right? Um, I did what I did to try to fit in, right? So I dressed similarly, but I honestly like that. That was super uncomfortable for me. That was not that was not at all who I am. The point is that because of my own background, the higher the education, the wealthier or more educated the circle, the more I felt out of place. The more I felt like I had to be someone that I really wasn't just so that I could fit in. And here's the thing, I generally am the kind of person who just doesn't give a fuck about what other people think. I just like doing my own thing. But I will act differently if it actually impacts the bottom line, right? Like my chances of getting a job or keeping it. And essentially, like whether I knew it or not, like explicitly in my head, like what I was essentially doing was playing that game, like playing that part. I was acting and I was doing it knowing that I had to do it because this is the game that's played. This is how you get to that place where you could land a job, right? Just like you would dress up for an interview, right? That's exactly how it was, except I was having to do that every day as I was going to grad school, right? And when you keep it up for long enough, then it just becomes so natural and easy to just switch into that mode. You just naturally move in and out of talking a certain way, talking about certain things, um, dressing a certain way, presenting yourself in a certain way, right? Um, but what's crazy is that if you pretend for long enough, you can't help but kind of become the thing that you're pretending so hard to be. You get so wrapped up in that character, in that role you're playing, and academia has its own little culture. And I got wrapped up in it like so fast, right? A lot of it was the pressure of getting a job. But I mean, it wasn't just that. Like there's a kind of culture that you get sucked into, right? Academia is extremely competitive, right? It's almost like a place where, at least, I don't know about other fields, maybe it's different in other fields, but at least in philosophy, right? It's often competitive. And it makes sense. Like I said, it's extremely competitive to get into a program, to finish the program. Like it's just a very difficult route to go. But like I said about the job situation, right? There's just not a lot of jobs. So because everybody's fighting for these, few positions, right? Everyone just starts getting super competitive. Like it's just a situation that lends people to be this way. Everyone is fighting for attention to show that their research is somehow worthy of consideration or it's contributing something meaningful to humanity, right? Um, And when you add the job market prospects, right, then all that competitiveness just gets exacerbated, and you start feeling a need to kind of promote yourself or your research, right? Oh, the self promotion, like I hated it so much, but then I also felt like I had to do it myself, right? I always held to onto this ideal that people should just naturally be interested in your work, and if they're not, then they're just not, and it's okay. And I shouldn't have to try to sell it. But of course, like without putting yourself out there and demonstrating the significance of what you're doing, people are not going to give you that chance to land that job, right? Um, so I'm not going to lie, I got caught up in this mess. I started acting and speaking and promoting myself in ways that deep down I really didn't want to. I think at the time I even created like one of those personal websites that all these other philosophers did, like all these other academics did, and it's like, oh, can't believe I have to do this. Like, it feels so gross promoting myself, but I did it because I felt like I had to. And the least I tried to fake it till I made it, right? And then maybe then I can make some different decisions. But the truth was I didn't feel like anything special, right? Like I said, I know that I wasn't anything particularly special. Like I didn't feel like my work was anything significant. I didn't feel like I was the best at my craft or, somehow better or more impressive than the person next to me. I mean, by the time I was working on my PhD, I mean, I had encountered way too many grad students and way too many professors they were on a different level, right? Like at each step, I felt like my ego was getting checked by people who were that much better than me. Um, they were more knowledgeable, more insightful, more creative, more skilled, more everything, right? And I didn't necessarily attribute it to any like God given innate ability, right? I just knew that they had had opportunities to develop, whether it was the time in the field or something about their background, that they had time to just like hone their craft in ways that I just didn't, right? I mean, I was well aware at the time of, statistics on, education that shows like, like how much better of a vocabulary you have at the earliest age when it probably gives you the biggest, right, bump. If you have parents who are highly educated and, just naturally use big words, right? I had parents who didn't speak English at all. So my vocabulary just sucked. Like it was shit, right? When I took the SATs, like I didn't know any of those words. I had to really study for them. I think words that like friends who kind of came from more educated backgrounds, like parents who spoke English at like a high level, they were just like, well, these just seem like normal everyday words. I'm like, what the fuck are you talking about? I never heard these words before, right? Um, you know, I met people who they just had wider exposure to different sort of experiences in life, like traveling and things like that. So they were more familiar with history of all these countries that they visited and so on. And it wasn't like they were trying to do any of these things. They just had the opportunity to learn all these things along the way, right? So I felt in order to keep up, I felt a need to kind of act to at least give the impression that I was closer to the level that everyone else is at than I maybe actually was. And then all that acting, I just completely lost myself, right? I didn't really speak in my own voice with my own mannerisms, right? Um, I didn't really, for instance, talk about hip hop unless unless there was like a fellow grad student that I knew that had some vague interest in it. But most of these things I just kept to myself or to a different circle of friends. I didn't really bring up most of my own experiences when I hung out with the graduate and professor crowd, right? Um, I often didn't talk about what was really on my mind or what I really cared about. I got too caught up in the game, and I began doing what everyone else did in academia, right? And the saddest part, I think, in all this is that I had forgotten why I had pursued this path in the first place. Why I even went after a PhD and trying to be a professor, right? Like, you know, like I said, I was told to avoid this at all costs, right? And I had risked so much to pursue it because I genuinely loved studying philosophy. Like it brought me joy to exercise my mind in that way, in learning and thinking and critiquing established theories and trying out new ideas. I mean, philosophy was like a playground for people who just likes to try out crazy ideas and go as far as they want with it, even if at the end of the day they just walk it back and they're like, it's not going to work, right? But philosophy, I love that philosophy gave me that freedom to think outside the box and then try a different angle in analyzing some problem. Um, but you know, I got so wrapped up in playing this game that I just really, it's almost like it, like when take on a job, and it's something that you love, but then you get so wrapped up in the job part that you stop loving it the way that you used to. Like that's kind of what it felt like, right? And I wouldn't really regain any of that, any of my true self, right? Like that kind of like the deepest core of kind of like who I am, how how I was raised and like what really mattered to me. I didn't really get to really live out that part of me until years into my career at Pasadena City College. So I would say it's starting maybe like just a few years ago, right? This is right now, what, 2025, right? I mean, I've been at PCC for years now, and even after I got tenured, it didn't feel comfortable in my own skin, right? You'd think that having some job security that I wouldn't feel a need to pretend, but you can't just turn off the acting, right? Like if you've been doing it for so long, it's hard to just turn it off. It just kind of comes naturally. You do it without even realizing you're doing it. But I think there was one thing that kind of helped me more than anything. I think one of the things that helped were finding faculty alongside me who kind of just the older faculty who've been there for a while, who kind of realize, right, at some point for themselves that they wanted to focus on things that actually mattered to them and they felt this freedom. And I was always kind of like, oh man, I wish I could do that myself, right? But there was something else that actually really helped me when I reflect on this. I didn't think much of it at the time, but I do remember that even in my first semester teaching at Pasadena City College, I had older students in my class. I mean, I'm talking like 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, right? I mean, my first semester, that's when I had my daughter. Um, that was my first child, right? It was the students that were giving me life advice. Because I had some older students in there that were like parents and they're all full grown and, they're, really supportive and trying to give me guidance and all these things that come with having a kid and raising a family. Um, but it was really the older students that I encountered that I really loved having them in my class. I just didn't experience it when I was teaching at the four-year colleges because you really don't get as many of them there for sure. So one of the joys for me at teaching at a community college were these older adults that have already gone through life, that have done the struggle in supporting themselves and their family. They've seen so much of like life's ups and downs, and um, now has the opportunity to kind of take a step back and return to school for at least in part for the love of learning, right? Um, and when I see them, I would just be reminded of the younger version of myself, the one that was so in love with studying philosophy that I would just try to rope fellow students in. I remember at UCLA, I would just try to rope students into like impromptu discussions of like crazy topics of radical skepticism and moral nihilism, right? Um, I was reminded of a time before I was concerned about job prospects and, you know, running the rat race to try to do all the research to get a job, right? Like all that stuff, like promoting myself and all that. Like there was a time before then when I was just a student who just loved learning, right? Um, and now I had these students who are in their, like in their later years with free time because their children are all grown up and off in college and or beyond. They're like full grown adults themselves. They're wanting to take courses that actually interest them, right? And these are even, I mean, some of these adults were like, no doubt, taking courses as part of like a career change, right? But their approach to learning was very different because even though they're taking like general education classes, they weren't going to waste time on classes they weren't interested in. So when they took my class, it was because they read the description. They're like, "Ooh, this actually sounds interesting. I actually want to learn it." So when they come into class, they're asking questions, like genuine questions that are coming from their own, interests, right? But learning wasn't given for them this whole time because of all the things that life threw at them. So like they really not only were was taking the education seriously in the sense of like picking the things that they wanted to learn, but like when they were in there, they just cherished that moment, right? That opportunity to learn. And so like even though yeah, they might have needed a grade to get a degree to get a job, that wasn't the thing that was driving them. They were there to really learn. And that's what was so inspiring, right? That's what like kind of took me back to the old days when I was like that and I had kind of missed it, right? I think maybe it's because education has become so, I don't know what the word for it is like, part of like the, you know, capitalistic marketplace or something. Like people seem to view a degree as a means to an end. And too many don't like kind of sit down and just enjoy the learning part of it. There's every once in a while you get a student that does so, but I don't know if it's like the life pressure, but I see more and more students that come into a college class and they treat the class. It happens less so at community colleges. It happens more so at these four-year colleges, but they treat a class as a means to an end, and so as a result, it just feels like some service I'm providing. It feels like a business exchange, right? It doesn't feel like a we're here to just learn and talk about some interesting stuff together and grow as a community. Um, but with these older students, I just always would get the sense like, oh yeah, they're actually trying to learn and they're just actually finding joy in it because they're not worried about all the other stuff. Like they've got the other stuff in life like locked down. Like they've gone through it all. Like they're here for the learning, right? And they're enjoying that experience, right? So it's like seeing them go through it. I'm regaining as engage with more and more of these students. I'm regaining that same joy um, as well in learning. And the craziest thing happened, right? As a result of kind of experiencing that joy of learning with them, I'm also regaining the joy in teaching as well, right? Because here's the thing, right? Like for the longest time, teaching was a passion of mine. I enjoyed it because I enjoyed engaging in discussions with people, and I also enjoyed the craft of teaching. But that also got stripped away when, all the job stuff and the worrying about future prospects and things like that all muddied up what was fun about teaching. I remember there was a time when I was just so stressed about student and faculty evaluation scores of my teaching, right? Because that was part of my um, teaching fellowship. It was also part of my teaching development, and it's also in my contract. And I have to get this done every so often, get my teaching evaluated, and so I felt a need to again act in a certain way. It was like I was performing a little play, a little show, so that I get the right sort of reaction, so that I get the right reviews, so that it helps my career, right? Like all that just takes away from the joy of teaching, right? And it's honestly nothing that I would care about. I couldn't care less about these evaluations, except like I was told that these evaluations actually matter for employment. I'm like, what the fuck? Like now I have to actually, focus on how people receive it. But then I just hated having to do that performance, but I did it anyway because it was tied to my future employment, right? So, because all these things that were a concern before about getting a job were things that I had realized like I could start to let go of now, I got to be more of who I really was. And when it comes to teaching, I was more like that teacher that I saw, right? The one that said like showed up to class in like t-shirt and board shorts and flip-flops. I mean, that's how I show up to class. I don't dress up. I'm not trying to be in a position of authority. I want to get down to the level of where the students are at. And I want to just introduce some topics and then have some real conversations and explore them together, right? I want to learn and grow just as much as they want to learn through our conversations. And I'm not looking to be in a position of authority trying to tell them what to think, right? Rather, I want them it to be like a mutual challenging each other to continue to expand our understanding of whatever it is we're discussing. And the best part in teaching is when I'm able to let my guard down in this way, when I'm not concerned with evaluations, when I'm not concerned with how this is going to impact my job, when I'm not concerned with, am I going to be critiqued by a colleague for the way that I teach, right? Or I'm not concerned about, am I going to get a complaint about the way that I teach, right? When I'm just able to be myself in the classroom and just engage in the deeper, more meaningful discussions that I want to have with you, the person that's in front of me. That space without titles, without hierarchy, with nothing else but the common goal of just the pursuit of knowledge. Um, I guess it's correct to say that I'm in a I don't give a fuck mode. But I think what's probably more accurate is to say I don't give a fuck about all the things that have always been pretty meaningless to me when it comes to learning and teaching, right? The only thing that I ever felt was meaningful was just learning and being in community with others and doing so, right? I also cared about opening doors for others in the way that others have done for me. Like these are the things that I cared about, right? Most things in life I honestly don't care about, right? Um, Latest trends or like what's popular, like I could care less. Like there's just too many things in life I honestly just don't care about. I just find zero meaning in, right? Um, there's only a few things, but it just feels like when I reflect back on it, it just feels like life often adds all this bullshit that takes me away from what is meaningful, right? Things like I need to make money, I need to schmooze to get a job, I need to make a name for myself, I need to dress up in a certain way to be taken seriously, right? None of this stuff ever mattered to me, but I got wrapped up in it because I felt like I had to become something I'm not to get an invitation to the party. And in that pursuit, it's like I stripped all the meaning away from my own life. I mean, let me kind of restate that here. Like, just bear with me for a second. I stripped myself of the meaning from my own life. I did this to me, right? It's like because I was pretending and getting caught up in a rat race and not taking a step back to really kind of sit with what actually mattered to me, right? Because I was so busy just doing things that I thought that I had to do to get where I needed to get, because I was so focused on achieving the goal, no matter how it is that I got there, that I took away the meaningfulness from my own life. Like I did that to myself by focusing my attention on the other shit that really didn't matter to me. So here's the thing, from here on out, my desire for myself is to live in one way and one way only. To try to start honoring myself, like my truest self, who I really am, by giving my life the meaning it once had and never depriving myself of what matters most to me. And I hope that if there's anything I learned from my students is this one thing, and that I could hold on to it and not get caught up in the rat race again, not get caught up in the pursuit of all this other shit that um, I tell myself is important to care about. Because the truth is, I really don't care. And I hope that I could acknowledge that for myself, because that's honestly the best way to care for myself and to let myself live the way that I honestly really want to live.